based on the current mapping, is home to about 670 million hectares of forests and 40 million hectares of peatlands. Emissions from degraded peatlands in Africa are currently pegged at around 130 million tons of CO2 equivalents each year, while we're estimated to lose 0.4% of our forests. Without safeguarding these immense carbon reservoirs, we're going to lose the opportunity to reduce emissions by 4 billion tons of CO2 per year. And we're also going to lose reach on the ambitious Paris Agreement. It just won't be met without nature, without forests, and without peatlands. And climate and nature actors are coming together more and more. We've seen this. It's dynamic and it's crucial. We're building this momentum to advance the 2030 land and water breakthroughs, to raise not only awareness, but raise ambition through this confidence to protect these valuable peatland ecosystems and forest ecosystems. Still, low emission reduction commitments are there. It's still not going to make everything right. Just nature can't make everything right. We need those emissions reduction targets urgently. We need decarbonization urgently as well, alongside the opportunities that natural ecosystems provide us. And we're also being hindered by low carbon prices in the voluntary carbon market, especially. It's really hindering progress, especially for Africa. In 2023, this year, prices were around $3 to $5 US per ton in the voluntary carbon market, compared to about 80 to 100 US dollars in regulated market. That is a vast chasm, and we want to bring this together. This event is going to highlight ways that we are going to work together to unlock the sustainable investment for nature-based solutions, including by talking about what it means and how to produce high-integrity carbon credits, how to together push and increase the carbon credit pricing, and also to help to, and not forget about, the multiple benefits of nature. I have the honor to introduce Her Excellency Razan Al Mabrouk. She's our UN climate change high-level champion, taking us to the COP28 and beyond. I'd love to invite you here to kick us off in setting the scene for this nature and climate piece. Thank you.
I think you've set the scene, but I'll perhaps just provide a bit of framing. So yes, I'm the UN high-level champion for climate change, but I'm also the president of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And sitting here, I see a number of our members in the audience. Not really an audience. I hope this is a participatory forum, so I'm really eager to learn and hear from you. We're here really to engage on a common purpose, and that is to really raise the profile on nature within the climate change discourse. But as you said, not only within the climate change discourse, we shouldn't be myopic, but we need to recognize that yes, while nature can't solve everything, but nature is life. It is the critical infrastructure by which all our needs are being met. I also would like to convey, as high-level champion and president of IUCN, of our steadfast support for your collective efforts in mitigating climate change by restoring and conserving Africa's peatlands. And again, raising that profile. However small, we need every percentage. but it is significant. You've mentioned the numbers. Africa is home to an impressive 670 million hectares of forest and 40 million hectares of peatland. And they come with a significant return on investment. If we invest in those biomes, in those critical ecosystems, the return is not just on climate change, but it's back to people, but if we've invested right. I'm often asked, what is the role of the high-level champion? And the high-level champion's role is to really champion initiatives such as this. It's champion significant action taken amongst non-state actors. Our role, because I'm not alone, I have my co-high-level champion, Dr. Mahmoud Mahideen, is to mobilize, it's to align, and to accelerate impact of non-state actor leadership to help deliver on the promise of Paris. To succeed, climate action must take place as a collective. We need national governments, we need women, we need indigenous peoples, we need youth, and yes, we need business. As you said, the momentum of the unification of the agendas, the climate change and the nature agenda, is building momentum in the recognition that they are in fact one and the same. Climate change can be regarded as a symptom of our mismanagement of nature. We need to build momentum towards achieving this convergence by demonstrating certain breakthroughs. Peatland within the land and water breakthrough is significant, and we need to work together on that. What I'd like to perhaps encourage the discussion to focus on 3 key elements. The first one is why. So really highlighting the critical importance of forests and peatlands in combating climate change. The what, addressing the critical research gaps and uncertainties associated with peatland protection and management and restoration. And the how, emphasizing on the need for a fair carbon mechanism. Finally, let us remain steadfast, let us remain committed, let us remain consistent, and let us collaborate. We can't afford for this space to be fragmented. We cannot afford many initiatives. We recognize the complexity, but I think we need to come out with strong, consistent, collaborative approach, and I hope that COP28, and I will work tirelessly for you at COP28 to ensure that this initiative and others under the banner of nature and nature-based solution get platformed and get the attention that they so desperately need. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Really an inspiring, but a huge task ahead of you. But we're with you. We are together. And that's why the beauty of this discussion is that you can't separate these places. They're connected. Forests are critical. They're connected as well to wetlands and peatlands are also connected to the rivers, lakes, and streams. So it is about breaking the silos. It is about looking at the whole basin and also bringing people along. Actually, the people are bringing us along to really understand this relationship. Thank you so much for being here. I have another champion as well to introduce you to. This is a colleague, a collaborator, and someone that's immensely passionate about the work that he's dropped himself into. This is Jean-Jacques Bambuta. Welcome, Jean-Jacques. Jean-Jacques is the head of the Peatlands unit within the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development of the Democratic Republic of Congo. I'd also like to invite Bob Kazunga from Uganda, the Red Plus National Focal Point. Uganda is a champion working on red and forests and also on the wetlands piece. You have leadership and a very big role similarly in the Nile Basin as DRC within the Congo Basin. So really interesting to both have you here with us today. I'd like to ask you questions, Jean-Jacques, and feel free to answer it or also expand into a perspective from the Democratic Republic of Congo. But my question is, how do you see the importance of science and also traditional knowledge, traditional ways of knowing, in setting out a sustainable development pathway for Congo peatlands specifically?
Excuse me, and I'd like to use this floor because what I'll be saying will be coming from my legs.
Yes. You stand with strength there, Jean-Jacques. Be comfortable.
Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, the main message that I would like to share with you is, at this moment, my country, Democratic Republic of Congo, is really on his way to the climate economy, taking into account peatland. As you may know, since 5 days, taking into account advice that are coming from all peatland enthusiasts, from Global Peatland Initiative, from universities, from local communities and indigenous people, the Democratic Republic of Congo is looking forward to build one of the strong peatland policy. But as you may also know, in the same area that we may find peatland in DRC, we have also oil. Now, the choice is not, let's say, easy, because as country, will we decide, let's say, to go on the way of peatland conservation by ignoring oil that we may have on the peatland, or we will decide to destroy peatland and make the oil extraction? Sometimes I'm used to discuss with the minister in charge of oil, and he used also to tell me, Mr. Bambuta, okay, I'm looking forward to get to my oil. Can you please remove your peatland so I can get my oil? That means that the choice is not easy. But since, let's say, 5 days, we have one of the best good news since we have begun to make this activity of peatland policy identification. The good news is the Democratic Republic of Congo have decided that he will make one of the strong climate economy, which will be taking into account not only the protected area, but also peatland. It means that peatland will get one of the special status as a protected area. This is one of our best results since, let's say, 5 years that we are fighting in order to identify peatland policy. But at the same time, we cannot talk about conservation without bringing out the real value of conservation. Remember that in the same area that we have peatland, we have also oil. It means that we have also one of the important responsibility to bring out the value of conservation. Now, here is the DRC's message to private sector. We have, DRC have, according all the landscape of his peatland, because we have peatland not only in the central basin of DRC, we have a peatland also in the mangrove, we have peatland in the eastern part of DRC, what we call Valley des Rift, I don't know what it is in English, Rift Valley, and we have also peatland in the Katanga. Let's say, if I can make one extrapolation, we are talking about 37 gigaton of carbon. It means that we have one of the big potential for private sector. So we are calling you, if we are there, come and visit peatland in DRC. We can identify what we can be doing together. Now, when we are looking forward to identify the peatland policy, we cannot ignore all advice that can come from scientific, because at this moment we are also looking forward how can we make the knowledge development on peatland, because we are talking about one of these new ecosystem on which we may know many things, but we have also to discover also many things on peatland, apart from mapping, apart from also evaluation of carbon, and also the practice that indigenous people and local community are using in order to conserve peatland, because we are talking about peatland for local communities and indigenous people. This area is this one in which they are producing their own livelihoods. Now, to close my message, I will just remind you that we have one of the important potential of carbon. Please, if you can visit peatland in DRC, do not hesitate. We are there so we can share all best information. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you. Thank you, and congratulations, Jean-Jacques, for your work. That awareness raising, but also, those amazing peatland forests have been there for millennia, and only discovering really the true depth and importance of them, not only for water, for carbon, but also for species. Many of the endangered species are using these places as a refuge. If you don't know what a peatland is, don't worry, there'll be more discovery after the session. We're not going to dominate the discussion here, but it just want to tweak those ideas in your head and to just really look at what is underneath the soil, what is underneath our beautiful rainforests. And they're can't be separated, right? They can't be torn apart. They are one and the same, both water and land and forest together. Bob, I wanted just to now pass to you. Uganda has been a great leader, gaining knowledge, experience through REDD+ mechanisms, as well as I said, combining with other Nile Basin countries and bridging the gap of knowledge there. In considering Uganda's climate action initiatives, how do you perceive the role and opportunity of forests for Uganda? Please.
Thank you very much. Can I also use that? Just to be consistent with my colleague from DRC. I don't want to break the rhythm of speaking from the feet. I like that. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, moderator, for inviting us to this session. Yes, indeed, Uganda has been taking leadership in the region in a number of things. Just to mention that Uganda is still the Pearl of Africa. That's quite important. Because our forests play a very important role, especially in ensuring that livelihoods of the people sustained, because forests deliver all the different livelihoods elements that you can think about: source of energy, a source of income, medicine, and all these different kind of things. In addition to that, they mitigate significantly impacts of climate change. And you'll agree with me that Uganda's forest estate is one of the largest sinks as well. Of course, I know that the people from the Congo Basin will say we are but our forests as well are great sinks, as you'll see from here from the statistics that we have. And Uganda's forestry sector contributes significantly to the development agenda of the country, to a tune of 6% of GDP. And that is conservative because we've not, put in all the data that we ought to put into the natural capital accounting system that we have recently prepared for the country. But if we did have all the data for forestry's contribution, I must tell you that will be a double, maybe 12 or even a triple. Yeah, because there are some estimates that it could be about 20 or 18 or so % to contribution of the GDP. So that is how huge the forestry sector has a contribution to the national development. But not only that, but other sectors depend significantly on forests. The energy sector, for example, most of the biomass energy demand to a tune of about 88 or to 90% demand for biomass is delivered by forestry in the country. I know that there are discussions on how we can make that sustainable, yeah, but it is correct that our communities depend entirely, over 80% to 90% on biomass energy, and it's the greatest source of energy so far. Even with the improvements we have in electrification and the other sources, renewable energy source of energy, but biomass is quite significant, demanded quite significantly in the country. In addition to that, we as a forestry sector are making a significant contribution into delivering the aspirations of the updated national determined contribution. Our NDC is quite, for the mitigation actions, up to a tune of about 82 or so % is delivered by forestry actions. And so that's quite important. And just to mention also that about 5.9% of that is delivered by the unconditional arm of our NDC. So forestry is extremely important in delivering to the aspirations, the needs of our climate actions that we have committed as a country. Allow me to mention also that forestry makes a significant contribution to the other sectors of energy. Because our hydrological functions from forestry deliver the water that we use for hydroelectricity generation, for example. That's quite important. I don't want to only keep on forestry because we can't separate peatlands from forests. In Uganda, peatlands, maybe to mention for those who don't know peatlands, all peatlands are wetlands, but not all wetlands are peatlands. That's quite important. So Uganda goes beyond other countries. When you look at the international description of the thickness of peatlands to 30 centimeter thickness, we have areas in Uganda with between 5 to even 9 meter thickness of peatlands. That's a substantial amount of peatlands that we have as a country. And we had some preliminary assessments of peatlands under the Nile Equatorial Lakes Basin assessment with support from the Germans and Wetlands International and UN, where we observed that we have 20.4% of our wetlands cover is actually peatlands. And up to about 6,878 square meters are peatlands in the country. From those preliminary assessment results that we have, a study that we did in 2019, early 2019, March 2 to May 2019, in the 3 countries of Nile Equatorial Basin. We didn't include the figures for DRC at the time, but we hope to do that in the next assessments. And also about 192 million tons of that in terms of carbon stock is estimated from peatlands for the country. From that preliminary assessment, which was only looking at the priority landscapes of Lake Victoria and a few other zero landscapes that we have in the country. And that also delivers about 0.075 kilograms per cubic meter of the area with carbon. So I think, in my view, peatlands are extremely important in the country. Wetlands cover has reduced significantly from 10.9% as of 2014 to 8.9% as of 2020. So the potential is immense through interventions like demarcation of wetlands and the wise use of wetlands and other interventions that we have as a country, that we are doing as a country to be able to reflect the actual potential of wetlands and peatlands. I want to thank you.
Thanks. Actually, if you want to stay there, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. But that's remarkable. You know, the peatlands community is learning from the forest community. We know we're talking about carbon pricing, where we're, comparing a standing tree with, it's like an old-growth primary 100-year-old tree compared to a new sprouting forest. So I think that that's where this discussion around carbon pricing, voluntary carbon markets, also needs to look at what are you actually paying for. And I want to just follow up with the question, because I know that you've been working hard, and there was a really great study done on public sector financing. So how do you see public sector finance stepping in to bridge a finance gap, the financing gap, as also an opportunity to garner this policy coherence? Because of course, when you look at the public purse, it's also cut up into many pieces. But I'm sure maybe some of the findings of the study that was recently done, you can look at how policy coherence, but also get yourself ready as well for a fair carbon pricing.
I love that last one, fair carbon pricing. Yeah, because we know that public finance can actually step into the gap that we currently have with that fair carbon pricing, if I may use that. Because at a global level, if I may come from there, we know that the investments, current investments rates that we have, a tune of up to about $4.1 trillion has been identified as a gap in that financing. So that's quite important. So we need to be looking at this differently, because forestry, as you might all know from public expenditures, is not accessing this financing directly. It's instead going to agriculture, inputs and subsidies more than forestry, to a level that up to about 3 times by about 2016, from a study that we did from 2008 to 2017. By about 2016, we observed that there is, subsidies for agriculture have tripled and have subdued, the investments in forestry or the expenditures in forestry. That's quite important. Therefore, as a sector of forest, we believe that the opportunities are there if we do coherence analysis to look at how these expenditures are aligned with, with the policies of environment. So if we can deliver environmentally friendly agriculture subsidies, for example, we should be able to tap into and unlock that kind of financing, because the analysis that we did compared these sectors. We worked the means of finance, means of agriculture, and my ministry in Uganda. So you find that we could we look at the 2 sectors largely for now, but you can compare them with other sectors, and we observe that forestry needs to be financed much more, and the public sector financing is extremely important for us to unlock this dilemma, because we know very well that the other financing from climate is actually not also delivering. You are very much aware that only about 4% of the resources that we have from the climate financing line are invested into forestry directly, and that is quite, it's worrying in my view, but it presents an opportunity for us that we can harness as a sector of forestry. And how do we do that? I think to me it's quite important. We need to very quickly ensure that we put commitments into action, because we have made so many commitments, but we're not acting on those commitments. We need to have a conversation between the sector of agriculture and the sector of forestry. We don't want to look at agriculture and forestry as opposing forces, because when I look at my RED Plus assessment of drivers for degradation, expansion of land for forest land for agriculture comes in quite, it's one of the greatest drivers to deforestation degradation is expansion of land for agriculture and into forestry estates. So we don't want to look at it that way. I think we can get a win-win. We can look at the way we can work together so that we have a win-win for both sectors. That's quite important. But it's also important to note that public sector financing needs to be amplified. And so a discussion with the Ministry of Finance for not only Uganda, but for the other governments, colleagues who are here, is quite important. Are we talking enough to the Ministry of Finance? Are we able to show how forestry can contribute to the development agenda? And for Uganda, we've been lucky of recent that through the WAVES project, I think, of the World Bank, we've been able to do natural capital accounting for forests, lands, and wetlands. And because of that, we should be able now to inform and convince the decision makers in finance ministry and also beyond the finance ministry that we need to be given more financing to deliver our aspirations in the NDP. I just mentioned that up to 82.7% of our mitigation actions are actually being contributed by the actions of forestry from the RED Plus Strategy and Action Plan. And only just about maybe 3% of that money that we can use to make a contribution to our aspiration NDC is coming from public expenditure on forestry. So you can imagine. So that creates a gap that I think we need to be able to look at innovatively rather than using the usual business as usual manner of accessing public finance. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bob, and thank you, Jean-Jacques. I want to give you a few minutes if you'd like to make any last final remarks. Otherwise, we're going to pass into the next phase of this discussion. Can I pass to you, Jean-Jacques? Thanks.
Okay, talking about private sector in DRC, we have one experience that that we can find in the Maindombe province with the project that is called ERA. But this project is only focusing on, let's say, the forest carbon without any activity on to the carbon on the ground. And as we may know, the carbon of peatland is under the ground. So at this moment, talking about peatland, we need, again, some activities like finalization of the mapping, the evaluation of carbon stock, and all activities according to the knowledge development. When we will have all those information, then we can make tools that will allow us valorize, to make the carbon of the carbon value.
Yeah.
Now we can also use tools that are already been using with the RED Plus process. As country, we are discussing, and I think in the coming weeks, coming months, we will find the good way, and we will call private sector to come and work with us. Very much.
Thank you so much. And of course, private sector is going to have that triple win. Not only by investing in nature are you investing in forests, in wetlands, in peatlands, you're also investing in people for their health, their well-being, water, the air that we breathe. So indeed, it is this triple win, and I'm honored to be on the journey with you, Jean-Jacques, as well as with Uganda. I lead the Global Peatlands Initiative on behalf of the United Nations Environment Program, and we are in this journey, and we're really learning from the UN RED program, from the RED Plus model, and really just trying to also establish the science, which is gravely missing. So what you point out there about the partnerships, about sharing across places, across sectors, and looking more systematically at the issue where you can't tease apart the climate and nature conversation. It is one. So thank you so much. I have the honor to pass to my colleague, Asante Sana Bob and Santisana Jean-Jacques, I'm going to invite Sekai, who's part of the UNEP's dynamic UN Red team. Come on to the table.
I think I'm joining the team in speaking from my feet. I think my colleague Diana just introduced me briefly. My name is Sekai Ngarize. I'm part of the UNEP UN Red team as the Africa Regional Advisor. For this second part of our session, we will now transition from looking at the science and the importance of these two ecosystems in mitigating climate change. We will now look at the other part, which is basically a session that's going to be engaging panelists, or in a dialogue, if you like, on the role of the voluntary carbon markets in bridging the financing gap for nature-based solutions for forests and peatlands in Africa. The discussion will also touch upon the fair carbon pricing, which we just heard from previous speakers, in order to ensure sustainability of these two ecosystems. In 2023 alone, the prices were selling for $3 to $5 per ton of carbon, compared to $80 to $100 on regulated markets such as the EU emissions trading scheme. In that regard, this session will also explore the possible options to ensure that integrity of carbon credits on the voluntary carbon markets on one hand, but also to see how we can increase the carbon prices in the voluntary carbon market. And for that, we will also bring together on the table perspectives from different stakeholders. We have stakeholders on the supply side, so the governments, but we also have stakeholders on the demand side, so the corporates, the private sector, the buyers, and also stakeholders who are striving for integrity of the carbon markets, and also to bring this up to scale. We will also hear from perspective from the civil society. So today, on the list of our panelists, we have Roslyn Fusaya Ajayi, the Red National Focal Point, Forestry Commission, Ghana. So we would like to invite Roslyn on the podium. We also have Julie Mulonga, Wetlands International from Uganda. We would also like to invite Hans Bratska, Special Envoy, Norway Ministry of Climate and Environment, representing the LEAF Coalition, so our sovereign donors. We also have Daniel Vicente Ortega Pacheco, expert, panel co-chair from the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, the ICBCM. For our first panelist, Roslyn from Ghana. She will bring Ghana's experience and perspective on the national climate change agenda, but also on voluntary carbon markets, including Article 6 and so on. So our first question to Roslyn is, what do you think should be the criteria from the supply and the demand side to determine an increased carbon price?
Thank you very much, and a very good afternoon to everybody gathered here. Thank you for having Ghana here and for having me. So the first question that I would want to pose in answering that question is, do we want the price to deliver? It's a question that is very important. When we talk about drivers of deforestation and forest degradation, we are talking about livelihoods of people. Sometimes we think that these are only illegalities, but they are illegalities that are feeding people. And so if you want to understand what price is a fair price, you need to think about what are the different elements that go into the business as usual. So if someone is deforesting for illegal logging purposes, illegal mining, what is that commensurate value? And you also need to understand the chain of actors within that space. Most of the times we point fingers at the local community members, but they are really not the very first front. However, they have so much power to say that we wouldn't do this. Because as I sit here, even in Ghana, I sit within the capital. I can't just move from the capital into the landscape and begin to deforest or to degrade the space. You would definitely need some local community buy-in. But why would that local community person give the buy-in? Because they are not getting the actual value for these resources. These are the questions that should inform the price. And what I realize is that there's a price that is being set that is largely coming from the demand side. And I wonder what factors contribute to that particular demand side pricing. Because you need to put yourself into the supply side. A lot of things go into determining the carbon price, particularly for the forest sector. I always say that the energy sector is different, the waste sector is different. The forest sector has to do with people's values, people's livelihoods, what people have grown up with. And so you can't just go in today and say, I'm paying $3, just leave the forest standing. What will that $3 cover? I really appreciate the FCPF process, even though it's paying $5. I think that if you put together everything that we had from readiness, I mean, Uganda is a country in there, through to the countries that have the forest investment program, it adds up to some sort of higher price because we've had grants to set up infrastructure and the different structures. But if we go into the nitty-gritties for $5, we've just received our very first carbon fund payment. It's buying cutlasses for farmers. My question is the cutlass enough incentive to keep the farmer away from the forest? So to determine a fair price and to understand what is this fair price and why are you paying this price is to stop a problem. If the price cannot stop the problem, it's not a fair price. And it could mean that what will stop the problem in Ghana is different from what will stop the problem in Uganda. And so we need to have these holistic sort of assessments. I believe that a lot of forest countries have done this, but not at the scale that we have published this. These are in well-documented spaces, and people can easily refer. And so all the time, we don't have the sort of data that has been peer-reviewed to easily present to say that, well, this is what it cost me to generate a ton of carbon in Ghana, or even in this landscape in Ghana, which might be different from another landscape. So if we want to really answer that question, these are the nuances that we need to consider. What do we want the price to do? If the price cannot stop deforestation, cannot stop forest degradation, we are not paying the right price. Thank you.
Thank you for that reflection on that question. We have a second question for you, which is, what can African governments do to ensure that the voluntary carbon market conditions promote increased pricing for forests and for peatlands? And are there different pricing conditions that are required? I think in your first answer you sort of alluded to that, that the price could be different in Ghana, it could be different in the same regions, but in Ghana, in the same country. So on this one, it would be interesting to hear your views on what can African governments do to promote an increase in the right market conditions, but also in the carbon price.
So I believe that the first step will be to understand what sort of frameworks and regulations. I heard Bob talking about the Ministry of Finance, and I also heard him talking about the Ministry of Agric. If you get into the drivers of deforestation and forest degradation, you realize that largely a lot of them are not even within the forest sector itself. For Ghana, agricultural expansion, just as Bob said, is a key driver in there, which means we need to talk to the agric people. But to be able to talk to different sectors, to be able to appeal to private sector also, you need to have your frameworks and regulation. And that's why for Ghana, to be very upbeat and to welcome the Article 6 sort of world that we are getting into, we've come up with our regulation. How are we going to transact under Article 6? What would it look like if we have partners who want corresponding adjustment? corresponding adjustment could mean that then we have to do more to generate our own NDC targets. But if you don't have a framework that even does an assessment of what it is, if there's a corresponding adjustment, does it mean that you are going to have to pay 20% more of the price or 30% more? These are some of the things that African governments should begin to set up, and set up quite clearly. And it shouldn't just be that we are working in silos. I think that, for example, the Africa Carbon Markets Initiative is a space where we can define this on very broad terms and come to a very good understanding. We are having this summit. There's a declaration that's going to come out of this summit. What would that declaration set forth as a principle, as a guide, so that we can all glean from and define our country-specific or landscape-specific nuances? And so getting into the framework, getting into the regulation, and also having a very good space for investor buy-in is needed. We need to understand. I always say that it's a mutual space that we are in. I'm a forest country. But of course, if I expect Norway to invest, I also need to understand what are the interests of Norway, just as I want Norway to understand my interests. And until you start to pen down what these frameworks and regulations look like and consult largely on them, you might not really be in a good space to negotiate what you want. Thank you.
Thank you for that elaboration on the law. Thank you. I think that is a discussion we had in another fora, and that was the answer that we were given as well, that African governments have a role to play in also creating the enabling conditions to make sure that people can come and want to invest, but also create the right market conditions. So that was a very good reflection on that. So our last and final question for you is, what challenges are African countries facing towards carbon pricing, and what do you see as solutions? I suppose perhaps you've partially answered this as well.
So what challenges are we facing? First of all, I think that we are facing a challenge of a blame game, which is not really ideal. Because if you go back to issues, I mean, I'm from the forestry sector, so I speak about forests. A lot of the corporates that have now pledged to deforestation-free supply have in the past, in one way or the other, contributed to deforestation, whether knowingly or unknowingly. You don't just stand up today and say, well, I have a commitment. For example, the EU due diligence regulations say that, well, our companies should fulfill 1, 2, 3. What happened in the past? Nobody is saying that we should keep dwelling on the past. But when you have an idea of who contributed in the past, it informs where you're going. And so you shouldn't come into a space where you have defined regulation that is more like crippling or going to cripple. Ghana is a country that's known for cocoa, just as Cote d'Ivoire. We are the 2 largest producers of beans on the global market. And we have the due diligence regulations that come in and say, okay, well, this is for industry, it's not really for the country. But the question is, industry is not operating in space. Industry is operating within the country. And so if you have regulations that do not favor the country, then you are indirectly saying that industry should shift their engagements to other spaces. But this is a problem that everybody else has contributed to. It's not just about Ghana or Cote d'Ivoire, whether we knew or we didn't know. So that is one of the biggest challenges I find that we are facing. And this also leads to so much expectation now on countries to fulfill different requirements without any particular transition space. When we talk about energy, we hear the just energy transition. Why should energy transition be just, but not forest transition? Can't we have a just forest transition as well? Is it so different? When we talk about energy sector emissions, people are willing to pay so much for reductions in the energy sector. But everywhere I go, I keep hearing that forest and nature-based solutions contribute to a third, and not just from normal people, from scientists, from the IPCC. So that which has the ability to contribute to a third of the solution, rather is fraught with so many bottlenecks. Today you see an article in somewhere saying that methodologies have challenges, but we need to appreciate incremental growth. Look at forest landscapes and how vast they are. Having an MRV methodology is not that simple. But if we don't appreciate the growth that African countries are making, we are not really going to get there, because I think we are in a space where the goalpost just keeps changing. And it just keeps changing requirements from the demand side, not from the supply side. But if you are really to get into economics, the supply side should be able to determine price based on the demand. But in this case, the demand side is telling us everything else. Why should that be? These are the challenges that if we are able to understand each other and know that, I'm a forest country, I don't do illegal logging, I don't do illegal mining myself. There are champions in spaces who are trying to make this work. And there are also people in spaces who are also doing other things. But the more we have these platforms that are speaking to the right things, we should provide the enabling environment for that just transition within the forest sector, not just the energy sector. Because if you go into countries that are using coal and other fossil fuels, they come up with their own time frames. Why are we not coming up with our own time frames? Why are our time frames being criticized so much? Why is the EU determining the time frame for stopping deforestation-free commodity production per se? That's what I'll end this with. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that sober reflection. I think some food for thought for all of us, that perhaps we need to look at both the supply side and the demand side. A few weeks ago, we were in another conversation and the same issue again came up about the need perhaps to regulate both the demand side and the supply side. So perhaps that's something for the future, but it's probably coming. So thank you so much for that country perspective. Sorry. Oh, okay. Sorry. Do I need to repeat myself? Okay, I was just saying thank you so much for that country perspective from Roslyn Ajayi from Ghana. So thank you so much for really informing us on what countries are really thinking, but also what governments are going through and what challenges they are facing, but also for proposing solutions on what can be done to make sure that the voluntary carbon markets has a fair carbon price. So thank you so much for that. If you wish to stay, it's okay. I would say stay if you can. Yeah, thank you. Our second speaker is Julie Mulonga, Wetlands International, Uganda. So she's going to bring to us a civil society perspective on this topic. And for that, we have a question on, can you comment on how increased carbon pricing is essential to ensure sustainable adaptation and resilience of peatlands and forest-dependent communities? That's her first question. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. I work with Wetlands International, as you quite clearly mentioned. Peatlands is a major part of our work. So we've been doing that for a number of years, and indeed we have done some work within Uganda. We've done some studies, and we are also now working a lot with the communities, because a lot of times we forget that there are communities who actually rely on these peatlands. So we are working with these communities. Now, as a lot of the speakers have said, peatlands are indeed the largest carbon storage of all ecosystems. But unfortunately, they're being degraded. And if we want to restore them, we have to think of rewetting, we have to think of paludiculture, and indeed we see our colleagues in Indonesia focusing a lot on this. Now, this costs a lot of money. In fact, when we're doing the VCM guidelines within Wetlands International, with other partners, including Common Land and so on, we found that we have to mobilize at least $300 billion by 2050 to be able to restore these peatlands. Now, where is this finance going to come from? Obviously, we have to start looking at other sources of this finance. One of the sources could be carbon financing. And really, this tradable carbon credits can actually support all this peatland restoration work. And of course, as peatlands thrive, then communities are also able to thrive because they really depend on these peatlands. So for us who work with the communities, this is indeed a win-win for us. Of course, without looking at all those other intricacies that are being mentioned by Ghana. Now, managing and standardizing these carbon credits is also something very important because the communities also have to benefit from them. Unfortunately, when you hear $3 to $5, where are they going to benefit from all this? So indeed, one of the things that we have done as Wetlands International with other partners is we've worked on guidelines. And these guidelines are actually to set some best practices in terms of these VCMs and to ensure that companies are actually first reducing their emissions before they use carbon credits to address the rest. Because unfortunately, that is not what is happening. Okay? And then the second thing we feel is that when you talk of carbon credits, the first thing you have to think of is conservation. Unfortunately, we don't do that. Think of conservation, put your long-term goal in place in terms of conservation. And then, of course, have some measures in terms of impact, in terms of reducing your carbon emissions. And then after that, generate your revenue. Then how your community is going to benefit from that. So I don't have enough expertise to talk about the pricing, but what I can talk about is what we feel as we work with those communities when it comes to the carbon. So those are just some of the things that I'd like to mention in terms of that.
Thank you. The second question and last question for you is, what are the challenges? What challenges are African communities facing in accessing carbon markets, but also scaling up ecosystem conservation and restoration in the Nile Basin?
Okay, so for one, I'd like to mention the issue of limited financial resources. Everybody is talking, even here, within this meeting about finance. So there's need for finance for these communities. So they also have to invest somehow in developing these carbon projects. So indeed, they do need the finance for that. And then, of course, the transactional costs that are associated with all this are also quite high. So again, these need to be covered, especially within the African countries and the communities that we are working with. And then technical capacity. We hear that it is sufficient, but actually when we were working within Uganda, we had to get a lot of capacity from Greifswald Mire University, which means we don't have the capacity within our countries. So that also needs to come in so that we can move to the next level in terms of this. And then, of course, there's very unclear and insecure land rights. You know, you go to a lot of these communities, they're not really sure in terms of their land. So that's another thing that needs to be very clear. And then, of course, something you mentioned in terms of the regulatory frameworks, those also need to put in place. We are beginning to see some credits in terms of that, but more work needs to be done in terms of putting those regulatory frameworks in place. So those are the four I'd mentioned. Of course, there's a whole list, as you mentioned, but let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that reflection. I think there are two key messages there about the role of the carbon market itself in generating some of those revenues that are required, not only to be able to conserve these peatlands, but also to stop the degradation going on, but also the need to build technical capacity to support African communities in making sure that these ecosystems are protected. Thank you so much for that. On our list of panelists, we have now Hans Braska from the Leaf Coalition, who is going to bring to us the buyer's perspective, current and future, on the voluntary carbon market. So we only have one question for you. So far, payments for results and the voluntary carbon markets come primarily without upfront finance for those actions needed to decrease deforestation and degradation. Do you see options to have upfront finance embedded in the voluntary carbon markets transactions?
Let's see. Is it on?
Apparently, it should be on. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this meeting, and it's been very good to listen to you as well. If I may, maybe pick up a little bit on what has been said here as well,
Sure.
and talk a little bit about some of the kind of fundamental challenges that we see that we have, and we talk a lot about sustainable and fair carbon price. What is it, and how should we get there? And it's a complicated question, and let me just focus on market conditions. Was something I think Rosalind mentioned, and from our point of view, it's a very complicated question on financing in general, but I think that the determining factor must be integrity. I'd like to stress that at the outset here, and that means that the forced carbon credits give insurance that the emissions are real and additional. I think this is kind of the point of departure from us. Just want to say that I represent the Norwegian government. I'm not speaking on behalf of the whole coalition here, but this is something that I would like to stress at the outset here. And the LEAF coalition has or uses a standard developed by the Architecture for REDD+ Transactions, the ART initiative. And that sets criteria to ensure that forest carbon credits are of the highest environmental and social integrity. That means that we measure results at the jurisdictional level. I mean, that means either at the national or sub-national level. And it's intended then that ART will incentivize implementation of policies in the long term. So this is kind of a gold standard for telling buyers that this is something that has the integrity that is needed. You also mentioned the LEAF coalition, so I would just like to add there that we also have set criteria on the demand side. That is criteria that countries and companies who want to purchase carbon credits must also commit to reduce emissions in their own value chains. If I also just may comment on one other issue that's come up here, what African countries can do. If I go a little bit outside of what you asked me about, but if that's okay.
Sure.
Because I would like to respond to some of the things that has been said here. I think for African countries to ensure that the voluntary market conditions provide fair pricing for forest and peatlands, I think there's several things they must do and are doing, and I like to be on the positive side here. They actively engage and participate in the forest markets, and I'm very encouraged by the strides that many African countries have made in the last years towards this end. 2 years ago, Mozambique became the first country in the world to receive a result-based payment for the REDD+ credits under the World Bank's Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, shortly followed by Ghana the following year. And this year, Ethiopia became the first country to sign an emission reduction payment agreement with the World Bank's Biocarbon Fund. To date, 8 countries have submitted proposals to transact forest carbon credits through the LEAF coalition, and Guyana and our host country, Kenya, has also signed letters of intent. So these countries are leading by example and setting a high bar while paving the way for other countries to come. I think I'll leave it at that. If you have more questions for me.
No, thank you very much for that introduction to this question that everyone is always asking, that maybe we need more than just solutions that the voluntary carbon markets provides, but upfront finance to allow countries to basically set up the governance frameworks, the standards that they need to be able to participate. For example, the introduction of the Art3 standards requires that countries prepare their national institutions to be able to report, to develop the crediting baselines. There are many things that countries need to do, and also to develop the technical capacity to be able to actually adhere to the requirements of the Art3 standards, for example, not just on the MRV side, but also on the safeguards that are required to take care of the issues that we've heard about, issue of land tenure rights, benefit sharing, FPIC, and so on. So I think the Art3s is also going to really change the way that the way things are done. So it's something that's coming, I think, to a lot of African countries. So something perhaps to also take home and think about how you could also participate in this type of programs. But it will also help to increase the integrity, I think, of the carbon credits that are coming out of the voluntary carbon markets. So thank you very much for that perspective. Our last panelist is Daniel Vicente Ortega Pacheco from the ICVCM, who is going to bring the perspective on carbon integrity, scaling up carbon markets, but also making sure that the ongoing efforts to ensure social and environmental integrity in the voluntary carbon markets are basically enabled. So the floor is yours, and the question that we had for you is, the VCM has received criticism because of doubts about the quality of the carbon credits. What can you tell us about the efforts and options to address this key issue?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you first to UNEP for putting together this panel. I think it's a very valuable discussion. I'm from Ecuador, so I come from all other side on the equatorial line, and I think it has been fascinating to be in Africa, to learn what you're doing, the political will that has been shown these recent days. And I just came from a workshop with the indigenous people and local communities, and I think it's just the right momentum. So I think that thinking positively, as Hans has indicated, I think we just need to find a way of convergence and to deliver on this promise. When I look at the panel, it is referred to sustainable finance. I just want to reemphasize that carbon finance is just one part of the equation and may not be the key central component of it. When I think about sustainable finance, it's a $3 million market. The voluntary carbon market is only $2 billion. And if it's expected to grow, yes, perhaps in the next few years until 50 billion, but it's just that. And Art3 is just one of the standards in the voluntary carbon market. So having that said, I think we understand solving climate is an issue of scale and urgency. And from the Integrity Council, our take on this is very simple. The theory of change to scale up that market and to mobilize the private finance that would otherwise not get to the projects that we want to get it, is to build integrity. But it is important to emphasize that it's not only about atmospheric integrity. That is just one part of the equation as well. As important, it is also that we have a twofold approach to sustainable development, which is ensuring that no harm takes place, and secondly, that we also positively promote impacts on SDGs. And those have also to be real, they have to be measurable, and they have to be verifiable as well. And that's what I think about carbon credits also as a vehicle for impact finance, right? Because if we can demonstrate what is that real impact on social dimension, on environmental dimension, there is different type of financing that can be attracted, and the premium of the price could rise. What we have seen in the last few months in terms of prices, although it may increase and may be higher for those, it's still very low relative to what we should be aiming, which is a $50 price according to the international scientific reports. So when you think about that need, the approach of the Integrity Council has been, let us work together. And that's what I like about the Sahali word, Harambe, is that we should all put together, right? The integrity is not the role only of the Voluntary Carbon Market Council. We try to do our best, But this is like raising a child, right? You need an entire ecosystem, you need a community. So carbon creating programs, they need to do the best they can in their governance arrangements, and we have set out requirements on how that should be done, controlling conflict of interest if they are, making transparent information about the projects when it's needed, calculations and so on, making sure that in terms of additionality, requirements are there to ensure emissions impact happen, right? Robust baseline determination, permanence issues, addressing the resource reversal. Let us just please keep in mind, the risk of reversal is just that. It's a risk, like any other risk we can manage. But it shouldn't be part of the narrative to act in detriment of any of the carbon credits available. So lastly, I have heard a lot during the last few days about fair and equity. And we believe our carbon principles address that dimension as well, because we have introduced requirement for benefit sharing, for them to take place, for them to be a very equitable negotiation, and for the plans to be disclosed. We understand this will not be the only solution, and that's why we have also set up work programs, and we would like to invite everyone. We will be making a call for experts to join those work programs to continue to improve baselines, monitoring efforts, but also environmental and social safeguards dimensions.
Thank you so much. This was our last panelist from this session. Perhaps just to summarize maybe in one sentence or two sentences, the key messages that I picked up from the panelists. First of all, if you want to increase the carbon price, but also make sure that the market is stable, create the right enabling conditions, both from the country perspective as governments, but also collectively, we should work together. The people such as the IC, VCM, they also have their role in making sure that those standards are helpful to the countries that are implementing REDD+ programs in terms of setting the right conditions. So I would say create the right enabling conditions. Standards have different roles to play as well, but there are also many other standards that are available. Apart from the ART3 standards, there are also things like VERA and so gold standards. There are many other standards that are available. So it's up to countries to decide which ones to apply according to their national circumstances. I think to achieve a fair carbon price, we need to increase integrity. Integrity in terms of the robustness of the methods that are being used to actually do the measurements of the baselines, setting up the baselines, the reporting, monitoring, and verification, and so on. So thank you so much to the panelists for agreeing to share your time with us. So we'd like to give a vote of thanks and before I can close, I've been told that we need to take a group photo. Do you need to do it now, or shall we wait for Mire to do the closing session? Now, after. So if you can hold on to the last speaker, and then we can take a group photo. So I would like to basically introduce Mire to give us a summary and closing. There are going to be two closing speakers, Nadi and Mire. So I would like to invite Nadi as well. Together.
So speaking at the same time, you know.
We're going to do dynamic duo here.
Who wants to go first?
It could be a good option. So,
Okay,
maybe I start. Okay. So, hi everyone. So I'm Nadi Mahmoud. I'm the land use lead at the Pilot Champions team. And actually, what we want, I'm really out already, sorry.
I think for the interpreters.
I guess if I use this, it will be super noisy.
For the interpreters.
Okay. Is it good now? Okay, so I will try to be more quiet. So actually, I'm very keen to discuss with you what's next. So what we really need to have after this session. So I want to say that this session is a spark for something we are rally for, and we really need to start implementation. And this session for implementation, if you ask me how, If you know about the 2030 breakthroughs, the land use breakthroughs, the water breakthroughs, so we have Her Excellency. So the 2030 breakthroughs, either land and water breakthroughs, are very ambitious. And we are targeting to, for instance, to protect and restore 450 million hectares of land to be protected, 350 million hectares of land to be restored. But actually, what we are trying to do now, we are just breaking this down. And that's why we are here to discuss the launching or the science to do the targets for peatlands. So we are here with UNEP, other partners. We are working on having targets for peatlands to support the land use and the water breakthroughs. And that's what exactly I'm asking anyone here. Like, we already heard like amazing case studies. We heard about great work, and that's exactly what we need to do. Because we already learned it from the past that we don't need just to release flying satellites. We need to have something really implemented, something to be including indigenous people and local communities, to hear from them first. And that's what we are keen to have even before starting the work in the peatlands breakthroughs. So we need to have all of these great case studies. We need to hear from you. We need to understand what exactly need to be included in these targets to reach out the land use and the water breakthroughs. So this is the main target. So we are expecting to have these targets. We're also expecting to have the Peatlands task force. So feel free, if you are interested to have a role in the task force, please get in touch. And we are really happy to hear from everyone. What could you add to this task force? And finally, as I just mentioned, we really need to include indigenous people and local communities from the beginning. We need to include businesses, and that's why we also have something which is called the playbook for businesses, which is part of the Nature Booster for Climate Action, which is a call to action we are launching at the Climate Champions team, which is targeting businesses, cities, region, to take action for nature. And that's exactly why we also need to include businesses in this. We are expecting some series of events. We are expecting some moments to have all of you supporting and releasing this work. So please get in touch, and thank you so much. Thank you.
Just want to say one word. I forgot. Okay, I'm sorry to take the microphone from Mire, but I'm also eager to comment on previous speakers' interesting interventions that I forgot to answer one specific question that I got. And that it is actually very much worth mentioning that the LEAF Coalition is considering whether advance payments for emissions reductions not yet realized can help kickstart supply. Sorry, I forgot to answer that. But now it's done.
Thank you, Hans. All right, so I know that we have a hard stop at 3:30. We have just had the pleasure of Minister Alet Soudan-Ono of the Republic of Congo, Minister of Environment, Sustainable Development, and of the Congo Basin Climate Commission just join us. She was supposed to do the opening. I will shorten my final remarks so that she has the opportunity to give hers. A couple of reflections. First and foremost, Razan mentioned that the loss of nature has probably contributed to climate change. I also want to insist on the fact that nature is also probably impacted by climate change, and we need to remember that there is this feedback loop and mechanism between climate change, nature loss leads to more climate change, leads to more nature loss, until we reach a tipping point that the IPCC reminds us of. Second thing is that nature makes no distinction. A tree doesn't say today I will stock carbon, absorb carbon. Tomorrow I will offer a nest for an endangered bird species. After tomorrow I will contribute to the hydrological cycle, and the day after that I will retain soil. Nature and trees do that all the time concurrently. We have decided to apply a intellectual framework to nature that suits us, which is one of carbon. And maybe one of the ways through which we can start addressing the interconnection between nature and climate change is also by reflecting within the price of carbon the broader ecosystem services that nature and trees in particular play. We've talked about unilateral assignment of prices, requirements, so on and so forth. I think there is space to level the playing field to address these asymmetries, and through the voluntary carbon market, to start having a gradual approach that doesn't set a gold standard or a standard that's so high that it actually leaves several countries behind and requires intensive investments, but then allows actually gradual progress towards those standards. And with, of course, a price that reflects where within that broad range of standards a country fits, and therefore, retributes and commends those countries that reach higher and higher standards. A couple of points maybe that have not been made. I think, Jean-Jacques, my heart is in DRC. My heart is also in the Nile. Today, my heart is exploding. You've mentioned the dichotomy that the DRC has between preserving peat and exploiting oil. That's also a dichotomy between promised savings or possible income and immediate income and liquidity. And I think there is that immediacy that we need to address and that we need to start thinking about in terms of those trade-offs that our governments are faced with. Second one is conditioned finance versus treasury resources. What we're seeing in the climate finance space is that much of the payments, whether results-based payments or others, are conditioned for a certain specific use. To the contrary, when you put your land into a concession, you actually receive that money into your treasury with a certain repartition of resources. But it's to the government to decide how these resources are going to be used. And so second, I think that this freedom of choice in terms of use of proceeds is a really critical one that we will need to be addressing. Third thing is that in terms of climate equity and justice, there is this drive or tendency right now, in particular in forest countries, to sell the cheap carbon now. The question that I have to pose is what will happen in the future when these same countries will have to actually invest in what Roselyne called the just energy transition. Emission reductions from energy, transport, infrastructure are roughly estimated at $70 to $55 per ton in terms of cost of a ton of emission reduction. When you're selling your carbon at $5 today, are you going to be the countries that are you going to be footing the bill out of your own treasuries at $75 per ton in the future? So attention to NDCs, to transfer of emission reductions, to how these resources are used is also critical. And last and not least, last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, there was a major decision on loss and damage. Loss and damage is the manifestation of inability to mitigate and inability to adapt. Maybe that also is an aspect that needs to be reflected in the pricing of emission reductions, in particular from forest carbon, because of the role that forests play in regulating climate, in regulating hydrological cycles, in preventing droughts, in addressing floods by the retention of soils, and so on and so forth. So just a little bit of food for thought, and thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Mire. And I just wanted to say that it's my absolute pleasure to invite you, Your Excellency, Madame Arlette Soudan-Nounou, the Minister of Environment, Sustainable Development, and the Congo Basin from the Republic of Congo, to let us know a little bit about what the work that you've been doing, about the challenges you're facing, as well as what is your message to countries, to partners, to people in the Africa Climate Summit. Thanks. And you're welcome to stand.
Oui. Merci. Je préfère aller là-bas, c'est possible. Hein. Je veux parler en français hein, pour que vous préparez vos casques. Puisqu'il y a... Voilà, merci. Puis je tenais vraiment d'entrée de jeu, hein, excusez-moi, je ne sais pas si ça marche. Ça ne marche pas. Vous m'entendez là? Vous m'entendez là? Allô, allô? Ça y est, ils ont rebranché. Écoutez, merci. Vraiment, je m'excuse pour le retard avec lequel je vous rejoins. Mais c'était vraiment pour moi une priorité de venir ici, avec beaucoup de plaisir. Comme on vous l'a dit, je suis Arlette Soudan-Nono, de la République du Congo. Je vois les éminents professeurs avec lesquels nous avons souvent des échanges, de la République démocratique du Congo en face, la République sœur. Professeur, salué, je vois Mire, je vous vois tous. Et donc, je vous disais que je suis la ministre de l'Environnement, du Développement durable et du bassin du Congo. Mais j'ai une particularité également, c'est de porter la coordination technique, en d'autres termes, le secrétariat des 16 pays qui constituent, sur le plan du découpage de notre commission climatique, le bassin du Congo, aujourd'hui, qui porte les pays d'Afrique centrale et d'Afrique de l'Est, puisque pendant la COP de Marrakech, il y a eu 3 commissions climatiques africaines qui ont été mises en place, celle de la région du Sahel et celle des États insulaires. Et donc, nous sommes répartis sur les 54 États africains en 3 commissions climatiques. Et moi, je suis au sein de la commission climatique du bassin du Congo et qui est présidée par la République du Congo. C'est pour ça que j'en assure le secrétariat. Au sein du bassin du Congo, nous avons en partage avec la République démocratique du Congo le sujet qui me permet d'intervenir aujourd'hui, ce qu'on appelle les tourbières, les peatlands en anglais. Aujourd'hui, peut-être que le GIEC, les résultats n'ont pas été rendus publics dans les cas de la publication qu'ils font régulièrement les scientifiques dans la revue Nature. Mais entre 2018 à aujourd'hui, il a été, en 2018, les données de superficie, c'était 145 500 km². Et la RDC en a les 2 tiers. Mais aujourd'hui, maintenant, il y a des nouvelles découvertes, notamment en République du Congo. Depuis les recherches, ils ont passé 13 années de recherche. Et là, maintenant, ils ont publié récemment, disons il y a 2 ans, les nouvelles superficies qui sont passées de 145 000 à 165 500 km², très exactement, et qui stockent pas moins de 31 milliards de tonnes aujourd'hui de CO2. Et c'est l'équivalent de 3 à 4 années d'émissions de gaz à effet de serre de la planète. Et donc, sur cette répartition, mon pays, la République du Congo, c'est 550 000 km², avec un stock de 11 milliards de tonnes de stock. Vous le savez mieux que moi, parce que vous êtes tous pratiquement des scientifiques ici. Les forêts séquestrent, puisque nous pouvons restaurer ces écosystèmes forestiers, mais on parle de tourbières en termes de stock, parce que nous ne pouvons pas reconstituer les stocks, puisque c'est un phénomène, un processus naturel d'amoncellement qui se fait de feuillage, d'entreposage. Et donc, nous, on a des urgences. En même temps, c'est bien d'avoir ces tourbières, mais en même temps, c'est une grande responsabilité. Parce que nous disent les scientifiques du GIEC? Ils nous disent, lorsque vous regardez les ambitions de l'accord de Paris, de maintenir le climat de la température de notre propre planète à 1,5 degré Celsius, si nous touchons ces tourbières, nous les exploitons parce qu'il y a des ressources naturelles comme en dessous, au-delà de la biodiversité qu'il y a dans ces zones de tourbe, mais il y a également souvent ce qu'on appelle les énergies fossiles qu'il y a en dessous. Et si, pour des raisons que nous pouvons justifier, dans le cadre de levée des financements, si certains pays se sentent un peu étouffés, et ils peuvent aller même de façon durable, parce que ces tourbières ailleurs sont gérées dans d'autres États, en dehors des zones humides africaines, il y a des États qui gèrent des tourbières de façon durable. Mais il n'est pas conseillé de les toucher, parce qu'il y a toujours de risques que nous basculons de 1,5 degré Celsius à 3-4 degrés Celsius. Là également, ce sont les scientifiques qui le disent. Donc il y a urgence, parce que nous avons des populations riveraines, des peuples autochtones qui vivent de cette pêche, qui vivent de ces forêts et surtout qui veulent aller vers de l'agriculture. Mais sauf que dans ces zones-là, dès que vous coupez les arbres, la différence entre les tourbières de la RDC et de la République du Congo, c'est que celles de la RDC sont irriguées par un système de nappe de couches d'eau phréatique souterraines. Et chez nous, au Congo-Brazzaville, c'est sans les arbres, au travers de la pluviométrie. Donc, si nous coupons les arbres, nous perdons ces tourbes. Et si nous perdons les tourbes, elles s'assèchent, elles brûlent comme dans des pays comme il y a eu en Indonésie. Et là, c'est la catastrophe. Et donc, nous demandons simplement, j'ai vu que la thématique aujourd'hui, c'est comment mutualiser les forces, comment nous mettre ensemble, comment mettre en place des groupes de travail. Et donc, nous travaillons régulièrement avec le programme des Nations Unies pour l'environnement. On a tenu à Brazzaville la 3e initiative mondiale pour les tourbières, à Brazzaville, justement, avec le PNUE. Et nous avons résolu de mettre en place un certain nombre de plateformes qui permettent d'avoir tous les scientifiques, parce que nous avons les plus immenses tourbières de zones humides de la Convention de Ramsar sur l'Afrique, oui, parce que pour ceux qui ne le savent pas, les tourbières du lac Tumba, comme du lac Télé en République du Congo, elles sont vieilles de 19 000 ans. Mais dans la cuvette chez nous, on a découvert récemment des tourbières vieilles de 18 000 ans. Et récemment même, il n'y a même pas un an, on a découvert dans la capitale même, Brazzaville, vraiment à 20 minutes du centre-ville, les plus vieilles tourbières du bassin du Congo, qui sont vieilles de 24 000 ans. Là où vous avez été, Diana, elles ont finalement, il y a eu une datation qui a été faite, elles sont vieilles aujourd'hui de 24 000 ans, et ce sont les plus vieilles du bassin du Congo. Et il y a urgence parce que vous l'avez compris, si elles sont à 20 minutes de la capitale, du centre urbain, ça veut dire qu'il y a un développement urbain qui se fait et elles sont préservées qu'elles constituent une surface de 19 000 hectares. C'est 19 000 hectares en fin de compte que nous devons sécuriser. Et il faut savoir qu'il y a beaucoup de biodiversité dans ces zones-là de tourbières, puisque c'est humide, il y a des gibiers et les populations ont tendance à y aller. Et donc, aujourd'hui, nous, on est bien contents que les plateformes se mettent en place, mais les scientifiques n'ont pas suffisamment de ressources. Nous avons été financés la première fois par CongoPeat 1 de l'Université de Leeds au Royaume-Uni, avec les différents collègues de notre frère, le professeur qui est ici, qui viennent de l'Université de Leeds, à l'image, je pense, du professeur Simon Levis, du côté de Brazzaville, du professeur Ifo et les autres. Oui, mais ils sont nombreux comme ça, de 8 universités pratiquement d'Afrique, qui travaillent ensemble et qui ont besoin de financement parce que le premier module de CongoPeat 1 étant terminé, on a eu une rallonge de 3-4 millions de livres sterling qui nous avait été donné dans le cadre de CongoPeat 2. Et bien maintenant, il nous faut d'autres financements parce que vous l'avez compris, il n'est pas question de préserver les tourbières parce que nous ne pouvons pas les restaurer, mais il est question de les conserver. Donc, conserver, il faut trouver une alternative pour lever une économie circulaire verte ou bleue pour les populations, pour ne pas qu'elles touchent justement ces tourbières. Donc, voilà l'urgence que nous avons. Les pistes de solutions, vous les avez évoquées abondamment au travers des thématiques que j'ai vues. Vous les avez évoquées. Maintenant, tout ce que nous pourrions dire, si nous n'avons pas la ressource nécessaire, parce que dans le cadre de la déclaration de Brazzaville de 2018, qu'est-ce que nous avons arrêté? Mais qu'il y a l'université qui va quand même permettre aux chercheurs et à un plus grand nombre de comprendre ce que c'est que ces écosystèmes particuliers des tourbières, parce qu'on continue à chercher à comprendre comment elles se forment, elles se constituent, elles se conservent. Mais il y a le laboratoire du côté de Brazzaville. En RDC, nous avons l'université régionale, et du côté de Brazzaville, dans l'IMT, dans la déclaration de Brazzaville, nous avions donc cet institut de recherche scientifique qu'il nous faut mettre en place. Et nous n'avons pas de ressources à ce stade. Vous avez dû voir que la majorité des scientifiques ont publié des termes de référence pour lever ces financements. Vous avez dû tomber sur ce... Ce n'est pas grand-chose. Ils vous demandent un maximum pour avoir les deux, pas plus de 30 millions d'euros. Je pense que 30 millions d'euros, c'est jouable pour conserver ce patrimoine de l'humanité. Parce que nous ne pouvons pas dire constamment que nous avons cette urgence climatique et que nous n'avons pas suffisamment de moyens pour nous protéger et ne pas protéger ce qui est avéré nous fait basculer d'1,5 degré Celsius à 3-4 degrés Celsius. Moi, je ne suis pas scientifique, je vous dis simplement avec les mots des politiques que nous sommes, mais qui travaillons énormément avec les scientifiques pour justement lever ces financements et porter le cadre institutionnel et réglementaire. Donc, ça fait 6 ans que je suis à la tête de mon ministère de l'Environnement et je suis hantée par la conservation de ces tourbières. Et au quotidien, je travaille énormément avec ces scientifiques et j'ai besoin vraiment que vous nous donniez un coup de pouce, un coup d'accélérateur. Nous avons eu quelques financements du côté de la République du Congo, qui s'étendent certainement du côté de la République démocratique du Congo avec la coopération allemande dans le cadre du projet IKI. Nous avons donc levé 10 millions d'euros. C'est déjà passé au bord du conseil d'administration. Nous avons également levé 22 millions d'euros avec le PNUE dans le cadre d'un projet de conservation également des tourbières. Mais vous comprenez qu'il nous reste ces deux urgences à construire, tant d'un côté l'université en RDC et de l'autre côté ce laboratoire. Donc je ne vais pas abuser de votre temps. Voilà le message que je pouvais vous donner, puisque vous avez déjà décortiqué au travers des groupes de travail, des plateformes sous-régionales, régionales que l'on doit mettre en place. Maintenant, si vous avez une question peut-être qui, à mon niveau, peut me permettre de vous donner une réponse qui ne soit pas trop scientifique, sinon le professeur qui était assis là et les autres viendront à mon secours. Mais je suis tout à fait disponible pour me faire excuser de ce retard, de pouvoir prendre une question. Ah ben ça veut dire que je me suis bien exprimée alors que tout était clair. C'est ce que je retiens. Merci.
Thank you, Madame la Ministre, for the heartfelt plea. And the real true issue on the table is indeed finance. There are opportunities, and we're ready to engage and collaborate to elevate and also unlock them. I'd love to invite everyone that was part of the panel to come at the front. We'll take one final family photo. Thank you so much for being here with us for this journey, which we're all on together, both in the nature and the climate space. And please do share your impressions, either on social media or also reaching to the coordinators of this session. We're available to connect you. Everyone is welcome to join us on this journey that we're here together on. Thank you so much.